In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the valve cover on this Nissan Altima. It's underneath the hood, underneath the engine cover. To remove a negative terminal on a battery, I'm going to use a 10mm wrench. I'm going to loosen it up and take it off and set it aside so it's not touching anything. I'm going to take off this plastic cover. I'm going to use a 5mm Allen wrench, or if you have the socket type that has the Allen wrench, you can use that too. It's probably easier to have a socket. All right, you're gonna pick this up. I usually keep all the bolts right where I found them. Just put it off to the side. I'm gonna take off this connector. This is for the mass airflow sensor. Set that off to the side. I'm gonna loosen these hose clamps. 8mm. That's probably good. All right, so now I'm going to disconnect this hose from the valve cover. I'm going to pinch the clamp, hose clamp. You can either use pliers or locking pliers. And set that off to the side. All right, now I'm going to disconnect this air filter. I'm going to take this wiring harness off of the clips so that I can take this whole thing off and not rip out the wiring. Use my pliers again, squeeze this. And push it out. And then I'm going to go for this one, squeeze it and push it out. And that's off to the side too. All right, I'm going to use a 10mm socket to get this screw bolt behind the air filter housing. So now we're ready to take out the housing. Just going to pop out this, there's like a little rubber place it sits. And you just pop it out. You got to use a little muscle and then wiggle it off. Now we're going to disconnect the wiring harness off these brackets and the connectors and the grounds. I'm going to take some needle nose pliers and just pull that out of the harness. And this one. All right, then I'm going to press down on these tabs here. Pull these connectors off. set them off to the side. I'm going to disconnect this one. And now you have two ground wires. You're going to want to use a 10 millimeter. I'm going to put these bolts back in so I don't lose them. Just enough to make sure they don't get lost. And I would just use a trim tool and pop these wires up. Look for any others, like this one. Take this off as well, just to give me a little bit more wiggle space. Sometimes they break. So we'll just zip tie it later on. So now we're going to disconnect this hose. Really, whichever end is easier to disconnect. All right, you are going to want to support your engine with a floor jack. I would recommend putting a piece of wood on the jack itself, and then you're just going to want to support the engine before you take off this motor mount. Now that it's supported with a jack underneath, I can take these out. All right, so you're going to notice these extra long bolts. I'm just going to keep these bolts in the bracket itself so I know exactly where they go when we reassemble. Okay, so now we're going to pull this tab back, disconnect this power steering reservoir. Slide it out of the way. The reason being is I want to be able to get to this bolt. All right, so now I'm going to take this bolt out of my motor mount. It's an 18 millimeter. You might need to hold this out of the way while you do that. All right, you can set this bolt aside. Now you're disconnected. So now we're going to move on to these smaller bolts. I'm going to start with this one, 14 millimeter. You might need an extension for the ones in the back. make sure you have all 4 bolts free, and this bracket should come up fairly easily. Just move that wiring harness out of the way. And once again, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it on the floor, off to the side, and leave the bolts inside it. All right, at this point, I'm going to disconnect these wires back here. It's a push and pull. Push down the tab and pull up. Just set it off to the side after you disconnect it. You may need a needle nose plier to get in there if it's stuck. Just be gentle, you don't want to break it. Okay. All right. Sometimes they get stuck. All right, so after you disconnect those, you're going to want to take this harness, these clips out of the bracket. By squeezing the tabs underneath and then pulling up on the harness. You're going to need some needle nose that have like a nice curve to them. Two. Three. All right, so now that you've gotten those disconnected, you're going to want to, if your harness is stiff and not getting out of the way enough, you might want to just hold it in place away from where you're working with a bungee cord. Just don't pull on it too much. You don't want to break any wires. Just like that. If you find that your valve cover is filthy, like mine, I like to use some compressed air and just blow it off. You don't want any of that debris going inside, so when we take this off, we want it to be a somewhat clean surface. If it's really greasy, which is why you're probably replacing your valve cover from all the oil leaking, let that air dry, and I give it one more. All right, so now we're going to take out the coils. I've set up a piece of cardboard here for 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm also going to label them. I'm going to write right on top. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that they all go back where they came from. You're going to need a 10 millimeter socket. And you're going to undo 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. Set 1. 2. 3, and 4. Now it's time to take out the valve cover bolts. You're going to start here on 1. You're going to use a power tool and a 10 millimeter socket. Two. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. And 11. 12. Once you count 12 bolts loosened, take off the oil cap. Now you can just pry it up a little bit. You don't want to force it too much. Maybe work your way back and forth. All right, so once you have freed the valve cover, you can take it off. All right, so now I'm just putting both valve covers next to one another, making sure everything matches up. And it looks good. The new one came with bolts, a new cap, and a new PCV valve. So before I screw that in, I'm going to put a little bit of silicone on the O-ring. I'm going to screw that in. I'm going to go ahead and get a socket for that. 24 millimeter socket, and I'm just going to snug that down. There is an O-ring in there, so you don't want to over squish anything. Just wait till it's flush. That's probably good. You just check your work. It's flush, so that's a good seal. You're going to want to transfer your old PCV hose onto your new valve cover. So to do that, you're going to squeeze the clamp. And there we go. So I'm going to now clean around for the new gasket. I'm going to lay a rag over just so no debris gets down in there. And once you're all set with that, you can begin cleaning. So I'm going to go ahead and use a plastic scraper. You can use metal too, but be careful not gouging into the head. That will cause serious problems. Pay special attention to the corners. That's where they use some RTV silicone to seal where the two surfaces meet. You want to get that bad gasket off before you put more on top. It's important you take your time and you are very thorough about this part. It's the whole reason why you're redoing the valve cover gasket, because it was leaking most likely. So you don't want to put the new one on and find out it's leaking all over again because you cut corners or you didn't clean it up enough. So take your time, be patient. So once you're done cleaning off the head surface, you're going to come back to your new part, your new valve cover and gasket, and you're going to make sure that this gasket is sitting where it needs to be and it's not lifted up anywhere. If it is, just push it back in and make sure it's not sticking up anywhere. Okay. All right, so I've made sure that my head is clean. I also want to get any oil residue off, so I usually spray a little brake clean on a rag, and I go around and I make sure it's all clean. Once you do that, you let it air dry a little bit. You're going to put some gasket maker right here, 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 and here. All right, now it's time to take this rag out because we are done cleaning it. And it's time to put the valve cover on. So you want to line up your corners as best as possible. All right, I like to put all my bolts in a little cup of some sort so they're easy to get to. And the sequence to tightening down is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then 11 and 12. That would allow the valve cover to not become warped in any way, and it'll seat down the way it's supposed to. So I'm going to go ahead and start my bolts. You want to make sure that you're hand tightening at first so that you don't cross thread. All right, so you're going to tighten down to about 17 inch-pounds. If your torque wrench goes that low, good. If not, just wrist tight. It's about 17 inch-pounds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So now I'm going to go back in with a torque wrench, and I'm setting it to 74 inch-pounds. And we are going to go in the same order. And when you hear the beep or the click, you know you're good. Two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 'Now it's time to put the coils back in. So I'll put 4 first. Three, 2, 1. If you find that they're not going in, you can put a little bit of oil on the O-ring where it seats in. Okay, and then you're going to start these by hand. All right, I'm going to tighten down these ignition coils. Pretty snug. Just make sure everybody's seated down nice. All right, now I'm going to take this bungee off over here because I'm going to put these connectors back where they live. Before I put this bracket on, it's easier to get to. So you're just going to push these down until you hear a click. As I go along, I'm going to put these harness clips back where they go. I'm just pushing them in. They're easier to put back in than they are to take out, that's for sure. You'll hear the click. There we go. It's going to go in the bracket. And this one. And the last one. All right, so now that all those are secured, I'm going to finish the rest after I install the bracket for the motor mount. So now I'm going to place this bracket back where it belongs. Feed it under this harness. Don't tip too far or you'll drop your bolts. All right. Once you feel like you're where you belong, you can start finger tightening bolts. Do not tighten one particular bolt down first until you get them all started. That allows you to move the bracket around until you can find where the bolt goes. Using a 14mm I'm going to tighten these down, hand tight, and then I'm going to torque them to 36 foot-pounds. Now we're going to torque these to 36 foot-pounds. Two, three, four, five. All right. We're going to torque down our ignition coils to 61 inch-pounds. now we're going to put on our motor mount bracket. I'm going to start them by hand. And we're going to put our nut on this stud. I'm going to use a 16mm socket. And an 18mm socket for the nut. Now we're going to torque these to 36 foot-pounds. And for this nut, you're going to want to torque it to 48 foot-pounds. All right, now you're going to take your bolt and you're going to feed it through this hole. You're going to want to line up the other bracket, this one. So I usually use a pry bar and just kind of wiggle it around so you feel it go in, and then you're going to want to hand tighten. Once you get it started, you can get a socket on there. You might just have to push your power steering a little bit out of the way. I'm going to use my ratchet wrench. Tighten this bolt. Going to want to torque it to 30 foot-pounds. All right. So now I'm going to put my power steering reservoir back in its bracket. Just slide it in, push down, hear the click. All right, now that you've attached those motor mounts, you can release the jack and remove it. Now I'm going to replace my ground wires, put them back where they were. I'll snug those down. I'm going to plug in my ignition coils. after you put them on, make sure they're not going to slide off. You can usually hear them click. Be careful you don't break any wires. Nice. All right, so now I'm going to put all my wiring harnesses back in their brackets. One here. One here. One in here. Just follow your harness to see as you go where they belong. There's one here. Good, good. I'm going to put it, this broke for us, so I'm going to put a zip tie there. I'm going to connect this. Now we're going to put our air box back in. I'm going to find where it sits in the little grommet areas. Push it down. You have a bolt down here that you're going to want to start with your hand. Make sure it's in where it belongs. Once you got that started by hand, you can now replace your air filter. It's a good opportunity to check your air filter, make sure it's clean. If not, replace it. Snap that back into place. I'm going to plug in my mass airflow sensor. And I'm just going to travel down the harness and attach it where it belongs. All right, and now we have one more to do. Put that right back in the bracket. All right, now I'm going to tighten down this 10 millimeter. Just until snug. Now I'm going to tighten down this hose clamp. Now I'm going to replace this hose. Slide it on. I'm now installing the PCV hose. Make sure you put your hose clamps back. Now we're ready to put our cover back on. I'm going to start these by hand. I'm going to tighten these down with a 5mm Allen head wrench. To reconnect your negative battery terminal, you're going to take it and push it down. Make sure it's on there all the way down. And then you're going to tighten it up using a 10mm wrench. Make sure it's snug. Wiggle the terminal, make sure it doesn't move. Now you can take your vehicle for a test drive. So you could take a deep breath, because this job is done.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.